For guidance. We pray that this evening may be fruitful for all those who are here in both realms of life. May we feel the inspiration in our hearts and in our minds to delve deeper into our souls, into our hearts, to search for that divine within us so we may connect with our Creator and our higher selves, with the peace within us. May we be open and ready to hear the messages and the lesson of today. Dear God, may you bless all those that are here, all those who are connected to us, those who are watching online, and in all around us. May our loving vibrations be reached and be helpful for all those in need. And so be it. All right. Welcome, everyone. And again, I was really intrigued by this message from Joanna. If you missed it, again, for those of you who are watching online, the first opening message we read was from Happy Life, page 152. First edition, and although her chapters are not labeled other than numerically, the beginning of the chapter refers to study always, which is really interesting because it seems like that's what Spiritism is always trying to tell us. Or is that, or am I misinterpreting? No, I don't think so. Who here likes to study? Jeanette? Maybe I should rephrase it. Who here is curious? Sometimes a little bit of curiosity in us. Sometimes curiosity does kill the cat. There's a reason why they say it. But sometimes curiosity is a good thing. Some might say that the allegory of Adam and Eve and the story of humanity partly induced because of curiosity. Well, curiosity can be a good thing. It's that urge, that desire for us to understand, hopefully to understand more. And when directed the right way, can be very beneficial to us, of course, to those around us, because if I'm curious about how I can be a better person, how I can be a better neighbor or a better coworker, then not only do I benefit, but everyone else benefits, right? Well, character. What is character? What does it mean to have a good or bad character? Anyone? What does it mean to have a good, and I'm going to do air quotes, good or bad character? Chris, anyone? Just the way you are? That's someone's character? It's the decisions that we make, right? Show what our character is. Like some might say our true character comes out in a moment of stress. So if you kind of like a dog or maybe even a cat, if you step on a cat, I don't own pets, but I'm assuming if you step on a dog's cat or tail, they might, dig their claws into you. Some dogs might, they just run. Unless you're a pit bull, maybe you would do something else. No offense to any pit bulls out there. Much love to all animals. We're all God's creatures. So character is what? So a series of habits we've built up, and it's a reflection of who we are, more or less. What do we say? Could be your personality, the bits and pieces of what make us us. Well, the Oxford Dictionary says character is a broad, non-technical term which suggests an interest in recognizing patterns in human behavior and in analyzing the psychological structures underlying these patterns. So like we said, they just said it in prettier, more fancier words. Essentially, it's the patterns of habits and behaviors that we have. So then we would say character can be good or bad. Air quotes again, good or bad, right? Because in the philosophy of Spiritism, we're all on this continuum of just trying to be better. Some of us are on a different kind of continuum, but we're still on that pathway. We are all destined to be happy, to be good, if you will, to be full of light. So Joanna starts out this chapter, interestingly. Choosing ethical and moral values and determining life's goals. Choosing ethical and moral values and determining life's goals, as well as the qualities that establish an individual's character, depict the emergence of conscientiousness. Its validity and development result from repeated episodes, accruing gains that enable the spirit to progress without long stays in the provinces of suffering, the legacy of ignorance. Recently, we were watching a little bit of a biography of Mike Tyson, and people can judge him if you will. Everyone does. We do it unintentionally sometimes. But what's interesting, what I didn't know, is that he had a very terrible, rough upbringing. And had it not been for boxing, he would have ended up, I guess in his words, dead or in jail. But he said boxing gave him a goal, gave him a focus. And through that, he was able to completely change his life. Now, is he a perfect person? Well, look at the media, Google searches. You'll rest assured find out that he is indeed not like the rest of us. But what is interesting is that what might have been had he not made that slight, that momentarily, no, he made that minor change when he was like a young teenager. And it's escaping my mind now, the actual what happened, how he found boxing. But needless to say, he became Mike Tyson, the infamous, right? Was he completely out of ignorance? Is he super evolved? That's not what we're here to talk about. We're just here to talk about trying to be the best version of ourselves that is within our power to do in this lifetime. You know, if you read in the Gospel according to Spiritism, chapter 17, and it talks about, there's, I think it's item 3. Actually, I have it written down. Chapter 17, number 3, moral persons. And then item 4 is called the Good Spiritist. But in item 3, which precedes the message or the text entitled the Good Spiritist, tells us that, you know, being a good person does not mean perfection. And it's something that, whether it's an atavistic mindset that we carry from previous lives or perhaps from previous religious upbringings, where we believe that we have to be perfect, that is a misconception that people might think that God wants from us, that God wants absolute perfection 100% of the time. We know that we're imperfect beings. We are fallible. And I heard a wise man said once, it's okay to fall. It's totally okay to fall down and hit your face, right? Metaphorically. Just don't fall down and hit your face on the same place again and again. Hopefully you're getting up, make another mistake. Hopefully it's not the same mistake. Hopefully, the point is hopefully that we're learning, right? That we are coming out of that sense of darkness. But Joanna goes on. Every achievement that is pondered, thought about, pondered, felt, cultivated, produces a memory which registers the strongest impressions. This is actually scientific. Whenever we have a strong emotion connected to an event that happens to us, the more likely we are to remember it. So, for instance, we had a discussion about talking about what was your earliest childhood memory. And some people were saying, oh, I remember when I was 2 years old. I remember when I was 1 year old, you know, and I thought, I'm astonished by that. Does anyone remember any memories when they were 2, 3? Wow, I'm amazed, amazing. Our earliest recollection, one of the few, and I've shared this story before, was going when I was in elementary school. I must have been about 7, maybe, going into this little gas station and stealing a 5-cent piece of candy. And immediately, as I was walking home, feeling absolutely horrible, I didn't even eat the candy, I threw it away. But for years after that, and even till today, I remember that because that emotion was so strong. There are other memories as well. It could be positive and negative that could happen to us. When Joanna's talking about every achievement that is pondered, felt, cultivated, produces a memory which registers the strongest impressions. If you talk to anyone who has gone through sort of a graduate level training or college and they kind of struggled through it, probably could tell you, like if I were to ask one of you if you did a course that was extremely hard, I bet you could tell me a lot about that experience because you took a lot of time and effort into doing that particular thing. So this is what Joanna is also referring to. It's the same mechanism that produces this memory. But she goes on to say, people should concern themselves in the good sense with positive emotions and events in order to store up memories that act as a stimuli for personal growth and harmony. So knowing that we have this mechanism within us to create these memories through our ability with strong emotion and when we put a lot of time and effort into something. So Joanna's acknowledging that, but she's saying, knowing that, let's focus on the good. Let's focus on the positive. Without a shadow of a doubt, we can name 1,000 bad things that are happening in the world today. But if you ask someone to name some positives, they're going to struggle a little bit. It's going to take them a little bit more time to think about it. Why? Because we're so perhaps accustomed to thinking of the negative or focusing on the negative. But Joanna says people should worry about the good, positive things that are happening and store up those memories as much as possible. I once heard this young woman, I won't go into her story because I don't want to highlight it, who went through a very traumatic and very public event, traumatic and public. She had been kidnapped and it was all over the news and it happened for years. But one thing that I heard, which for whatever reason wasn't highly publicized, was her life after she endured this trauma. And one of the things, and I'm not quoting verbatim, this is, me paraphrasing what she said, but she said, I am choosing to focus on my life in the here and now and in the positive and all that is good now in my life. She said, I can't do anything about what happened to me. I'm powerless to go back in my mind. And she said, I refuse to be a prisoner any longer than what I already was in this lifetime. And I refuse to give the person that did that to me any more importance in my mind than already exists in there. So I choose to focus on today and the life that I built today. And she had gotten married and I believe had some children and had a whole new life decades after this had happened to her. And it was really an inspiring story to hear from someone that had gone through something so horrific and so terrible. And I also remember hearing a story of a woman that escaped from Cuba. And I think it was her Gen Z granddaughter. And I mentioned Gen Z because I saw this in a video and they were talking about it. And it's so popular nowadays. Mental health is very much at the forefront of everyone's conversations these days. And she turned to her grandmother and said, Grandma, are you traumatized by what happened to you in Cuba? Because she said her grandmother would tell her these horrible stories about her experiences in Cuba and before she escaped and landed in Florida. And her grandmother looked at her and said, why am I going to focus on that? For what? I'm here. I'm okay. I have friends and family that died that didn't make it out. I'm here now. Why am I going to complain? America's great. What am I complaining about? So, I mean, she said it in such a jovial way. Granted, this was a 5-minute video. No idea, no other context about this woman's life. But the thought itself was interesting, was inspiring to think, wow, that we can actually have a different perspective. And we're not taking away that PTSD is a real thing. Men come back from war and have for centuries, having witnessed the most horrific aspects of humanity, and really it alters their brain chemistry and does require help. Not taking away from that at all. But rather, what's beautiful about Joanna, what's beautiful about Spiritism, is it simply is like someone giving us a tap on the shoulder, going, hey, do you know there's also another perspective? Not invalidating how you currently feel, not taking away from our experiences that we felt, but just saying, hey, we could look at life also from a different perspective and see how that makes us feel. Let's let that sit with us a little bit and see how that affects us. Like, hey, life can be positive and beautiful and amazing. And Joanna says we should concern ourselves with those positive emotions and events. But she continues. She says, however harried by fear and habitual pessimism, which expects continuous misfortunes, they soon forget about joyous times. And I apologize for the typo here. Joyous times, but dwell on disappointments. However, harried by fear and habitual pessimism, which expects continuous misfortunes, they soon forget about joyous times, but dwell on disappointments. There's a fantastic psychologist from the 90s, early 2000s. I think he passed away in the early 2000s, named Dr. Richard Carlson. He became kind of famous. He wrote a book called Don't Sweat the Small Stuff. He had some fame, like I said, in the late 90s, early 2000s. He had gone on Oprah at one point, but then he died of a sudden heart attack when he was still very young. I say all that to say, the book that he wrote, Don't Sweat the Small Stuff, in it, in one of the chapters is entitled something to the effect of, don't rehearse downfalls. I'll remember the actual word he uses, but don't rehearse nightmares. And I thought, what a weird chapter name. But when I read it, it made so much sense, because in the chapter he says, so many times in our lives, unconsciously, we rehearse scenes in our mind before they happen. For instance, let's say, oh, today I got to go talk to my mom about my pet goat. And I know that conversation is going to be really hard. And so I begin imagining, and I play out this whole scene in my head of what my mom's going to say about my pet goat. And the fact that I'm making this up because I'm making it up. And I'm saying goat because it's funny. But we rehearse the whole thing. So when we get to, your mom's house, or wherever you meet your mother or parent or what have you, that you already you've already decided in your mind how that person's going to react, or how your partner, or your child, or how your neighbor is going to react, or how your boss is going to react, because we rehearse this negativity in our minds. That's what Joanna means when she says we dwell on disappointments. People can become bogged down by fear and habitual pessimism. So we just expect negative things to happen. We rehearse it in our minds, and we need to stop rehearsing that and rehearse positive outcomes in our minds. She goes on to say, invited to adhere to standards of well-being, they eagerly seek self-punishment, utilizing masochistic means to inspire compassion when they have invaluable resources that would foster and awaken love. Due to their systematic unconsciousness, they refuse the rapture of light, beauty, and the meaning of life, surrendering to the vagaries of rebelliousness, that beloved child of disgruntled selfishness. In layman's terms, she says, don't be a negative Nancy. Who knows what that is? It's an English phrase. Don't be a negative Nancy. Don't be a Debbie Downer. Negative Nancy means don't be a pessimistic kind of person. Saturday Night Live used to have this character, or was it Mad TV? Used to have a character. Her name was Debbie Downer. So all the skits were whatever. It would always be this happy person coming and be like a group of friends, and they all be talking about happy things. You know, oh my gosh, I'm going to my daughter's bridal shower. Oh my gosh, I just got this new dog. Oh my gosh, I just got this new hairbrush. Oh my gosh, you know, XYZ, insert your oh my gosh moment that you're so happy about. And in would come in this character named Debbie Downer. And she'd be like, hey guys, what are you talking about? Like, oh, Cheryl just got a new dog. She got a new cockapoodle, whatever they're called. And she's so excited. And here comes Debbie Downer. Dogs cost a lot of money. Dogs shed. Did you know that you have to walk your dog often and you have to pick up their poop? And so she would proceed and go think about saying all the most negative things. And so the group of friends would be like, what do we say? So they would continue on the conversation. And someone would say, oh, well, I'm so excited. My daughter's finally getting married. You know, we're excited. We're doing this, we're doing that. And then here will come Debbie Downer. Weddings cost a lot of money. 50% of all marriages end in divorce. So she would say all these things. So it must be comical, but it's comical because it's true, right? Sometimes we can focus on negativity and rather than focusing on the positive, the beauty of life. Joanna actually, we've talked about this before. I believe it's in her book, Existential Conflicts, I want to say. Or it's one of her books where she talks, she references St. Francis of Assisi. And she always, obviously, speaks so highly of him. And she always says that the way that he lived. And remember that Joanna lived at the same time as St. Clare, the same time St. Francis lived. And they were noted to be friends, close friends, as close as one could be at that time. But she would say how magically he looked at life, that everything to him was just majestic. Nature was majestic. Life was beautiful. Everything. So whenever she talks about these kind of stories, we cannot but think like, wow. And I want you all to picture this yourselves. What would it feel like to view life in that way? What would it be like for a day that every time you woke up and you opened your eyes, that you looked at life like it was magical? You woke up and saw the sun in the morning, and the rays of the sun were coming in through your window, touching, caressing your houseplants, and you just go, wow, God is so great. What would that feel like? I want you to imagine that for about 30 seconds. And then I would love if someone could share what that would feel like for them to experience that for a day. Life from a magical, rapturous perspective. I'll give you 10 seconds. Think about that. And would anyone like to share in their mind what that feels like? Imagining that. Yes, you can. Hold on, Jeanette. Hold on. Wait a second. I got to give you the mic. I guess I have to give you my mic, right? The other one. Hello, hello. Jeanette.
Kirsten, I'm laughing because you just described my Saturday morning that I, still have time, don't have to rush to work and can pay attention to the plants and outside and, have a nice breakfast in the morning and everything's beautiful. Yeah, feels like Saturday morning.
So, in other words, you know what it's like. Anyone else? Same as Jeanette.
Yeah, the same as Jeanette. I try every morning to look through the window, have my breakfast, and just think today is going to be a good day. Thank you, God. Even if I am already knowing that I'll have to do something, that like I can't, there are obligations and I have to be very disciplined with time and everything. And then I try to feel the good, you know what I mean? Like, no, it's going to be good. And I try to feel and I thank God every day because you when you leave your house you don't know it's going to be, so I think whatever depends on me, but sometimes you are so tired that you forget to do that, I think, with the rush. And then you do things that you say, my God, how could I do that? Like I turn off my phone and thought it was broken, for example, but because the rush, and the worry about that day of work and stuff like that and this and that, and I have to pay for this, I have to do that, and then you forget to have this attitude. And I think this is a very healthy attitude, that you start saying, I'm going to start it with the right attitude, because that helps a lot. You attract, so I'm going to go. I remember a friend saying when she had to go through a treatment that she said, well, before I leave home, I already imagined the people at the hospital are waiting for me with everything solved already, and the spiritual doctors and nurses already getting everything, and that helped her a lot. So I think what a good thing it's a kind of a discipline way of thinking.
It's a discipline.
But it is hard at the same
Yeah.
time. You have to really know it's gonna be okay, because the tendency, the fear you feel and the
Fear is
tired.
overwhelming.
Yeah,
Can be overwhelming.
exactly.
Yeah.
We were tired. You are like afraid. You are disappointed. Why do you have to go through that? But she did it so well. So I think that is incredible. That's
Yeah.
really, it makes a difference. But when we are in the eye of the
storm.
storm, sometimes you forget to think
We
about
forgot. Yep.
this way.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, absolutely. I think you mentioned a key word, discipline. So my question would be, how do we get to think like this? To think in terms of life is beautiful, to look at the meaning of life, to just be accepting that we are children of God. In this chapter 17 of the Gospel according to Spiritism, in items 3 and 4, they say something beautiful when they talk about God, and they say that we should just trust God, who is all knowing. Trust that whatever is going on in our lives, notwithstanding the things that we have control over, but the things that we don't have control over, to trust in God's divine wisdom, that all things that are occurring, God is allowing and overseeing. And instead of us being overly worried and concerned and obsessing about it, to just as they say, let go and let God. Is that easy? And they tell us here in this text, it is not at all. It is really hard. And the only way it becomes less hard is the more we practice it. That's the only way. And here's a really funny, and we'll go on with the text. Here's something really interesting. It's both biological and it's psychological. Yes, it's biological and psychological, I believe. When you begin to go to the gym, and this is if you're an average person who doesn't normally go. When you begin to go to the gym, in the beginning it's hard. You know, your bones hurt, your feet hurt, your body, your whole system is not accustomed to doing that type of behavior. Even if you're just going for a walk on the treadmill for 30 minutes, that can be very tiring if you haven't built up that stamina. But, there's a but. If you give it a couple of weeks, even a few days, your body will get accustomed to it. That 30-minute walk that was at first painful and hard, by the end of the week, it's not as difficult anymore. By the second week, it feels pretty normal. And so that's how people train. They go in, they start a little bit, and then they build on that. So psychologically and emotionally, there's not much difference. In the beginning, when we want to change our habits, because that's what we're doing, we are changing our habits, changing the way we view things, making a decision. And remember, the last time we talked from this book was on duty. And duty was what? Duty is our ability to stay morally committed to something, even if we don't want to do it, but we do it because we know it's our duty to do that. And there's something beautiful and there's something righteous about that. There was a famous Russian Olympian. He was in his maybe 20s. And forgive me, I don't remember his name. Even if I did, I probably couldn't pronounce it. But if you all really want to know who it is, I have it saved on my phone. I just can't recall at the moment. But this is in like the 50s or 60s. He was a famous Olympian. He was in this lake, this body of water in Russia. He was doing his daily ritual. He'd get up, he'd go for a run, he'd exercise, and he'd go for a swim in his local river, lake, whatever it was. But this particular day, there was a boat that had a bunch of people on it. And for reasons that are not important, the boat sank, capsized, and all the people started to drown. So, and a lot of them went under. And as this was happening, this particular Russian Olympian was in the middle of his daily swim. And immediately, he just went into rescue mode. He began to, he swam over to where he saw the boat sink. He saved, there's about 70 people on board. He saved 43 people by the time their local Russian Coast Guard had arrived. 43 people, and they told him to stop, to go back to the shore. This case never came to light, never hit the news. About 20, 30 years later, because it happened to be something that had happened because of a government failure or something, and so the government didn't want to release it. 20, 30 years later, this journalist came upon the story through one of the survivors, numerous survivors, who said, yeah, it was this guy. You know, he was famous. And by the way, because of his heroic act of saving those 43 people, he became very ill, was in the hospital for 45 days, got pneumonia and other issues, medical issues. He was never able to play sports again after that. And so when they went 20, 30 years later to interview him, he didn't see it as a big deal. For him, it was the most natural thing in the world. And what was, I don't know if it's ironic or just interesting, was that as the journalist was interviewing him, what also came to light, he actually saved more people at a different drowning event, some other event, something else that had happened that also nobody knew about, that he didn't share, nobody else talked about it. And so people's minds were blown, like, who are you? So it's interesting for many reasons, this case of this gentleman. One, because he already had the habit of exercising, of living a healthy lifestyle. Had it not been for that, had he not been there that day, he wouldn't be able to save those people. But also for him, he just saw it as a natural way of being. He was a very simple man in the ways, in his responses in his interview was, people should help people. You know, people should help people. If that were my mother, and I would want someone to help my mother or my brothers and sisters, or if it was my uncle or somebody that I loved and cared about, he said it very matter of factly. That makes us think, how can we reach that level of matter of factness? Habitual changes, habits, right? Discipline, as Johnny had mentioned, being disciplined to think and operate that way. Joanna continues, believing they deserve to have it all, they attribute merits to themselves that they do not actually possess and refuse to acquire. And they talk about this in the Spirit's book when we talk about virtues. And in the gospel, I believe, as well, where they say that sometimes we attribute more virtues to ourselves than what we actually have. And this is very common when our ego is much more pronounced. The ego is not a bad thing, and we're not going to get into the psychology of the ego we have in the past, but the ego is not the bad guy. But when we focus too much on when things are, we want everything to be all about us, then we can sometimes think we have more virtue than what we had. And Daniel, remind me, there's something we read recently. Oh, it was in the gospel that the Spirit said, the message in the, I think it's in the Spirit's book we're reading on Monday. And here in our, it's the Spirit's book, gospel. The passage we read this past Monday is that it's better to have less virtue and be humble than to be virtuous and prideful, and to have a lot of virtue and be prideful. And this is what this is sort of referring to. When we have too much pride and often think, oh, I'm a very virtuous person, when probably we don't have that many virtues. But it's better to have a few and be humble. She goes on to say they compare themselves with people at other levels without considering these people's sacrifices or even how they feel, establishing concepts of happiness based on mere perception. This is left over from the primitive instinctive stage prior to the emergence of reason. This happens a lot when we look at successful individuals. When we look at the Bill Gates of the world, the Elon Musks and other people, and we forget how much they had to work hard to struggle to reach that point. And I love that I've read about Bill Gates in some context, at least in the following context I'm going to share, that I really like his parenting, is that he said his plan was not to just allow his children to be trust fund kids. And if those of you who are not familiar with what a trust fund is, or trust fund babies, or trust fund college kids, essentially rich people, there's a way, you know how there's different bank accounts you can actually get, there's a type of account called a trust fund. You can look up the specifics about it. But when you reach a certain age, you inherit all this money. And a lot of rich people have their children living like that. And this is no judgment. This is no judgment. This is just, he decided that he didn't want his children to grow up like that because he knew the value of work, of self-discipline, the value of going into working hard for what you had. But oftentimes we look at people at the top or who are not even from a materialistic standpoint. Sometimes we'll look at Givaldo Franco, Martin Luther King, Mahatma Gandhi, people who we look at as spiritual leaders, and yet we forget all that they have been through to reach that. So, Joanna, she continues, they are shackled by atavisms from which they must break free, and they stifle the possibilities that would enable them to soar on the heights of sentiment and reason. Conscientiousness is an enlightening achievement. Preserving it results from the very effort that shapes the individual's character. So we oftentimes, this statement here, that they are shackled by atavisms from which they must break free. This is when the phrase is, sometimes we can be our own worst enemy because we can hold ourselves back from our own happiness. This is very easy to see in other people. How many, you don't have to raise your hand. You can raise your hand mentally, but if you want to, you can raise your hand. But how many of you have known someone and you can look at them and say, man, they are their own worst enemy. If they just would be more positive, they just would be more uplifting, they'd be free, they could just reach such heights. Have you ever known anyone like that? Raise your hand. Most people know someone like that or have known someone like that. It's so easy to identify that in other people, isn't it? Can we identify that in ourselves? Have we ever had the courage to ask ourselves, what am I holding myself back from, if at all? Has anyone ever prayed that prayer? God, give me clarity on what and which ways I may be holding myself hostage from moving forward? Have you ever prayed that prayer? It's a good prayer to pray because it's super easy to see the defects in others. We're so accustomed for many lifetimes, as Joanna says, looking out, recognizing that in other people, not so much unless we built up the habit to really reflect and think about our own selves and how we are. But it takes effort. It takes habit, Joanna says. And here she reminds us, all individuals go down the same paths and experience similar challenges. With each test, people are promoted or held back for the fixation of the learning experience. Thus, progress is personal. Progress is personal and non-transferable, in keeping with the law of justice and equanimity. Can a mother look at her child, watching her child make numerous bad decisions? Can a mother look at that child, look at her child, and just give them light and just change them? We want to. God knows every mother has prayed that. But we can't, can we? I think mothers know that first and foremost, that progress is personal and non-transferable. Because if progress wasn't personal, if progress was transferable, then a majority of those sons that are in prisons wouldn't be there, thanks to their mothers. But that's not the case. When Chico Xavier was asked, Chico, aren't prisons full of evil spirits and like obsessors and that negative energy? And his response, no, it's full of mothers. mothers praying for their sons and daughters respectively, praying for their sons to wake up, to absorb the light, but always there trying. Because they themselves sometimes are not just in a physical prison, but in a mental prison, being held back. And there was a book that, not a book, a CD, and sorry, Daniel, I'm moving. I know it makes it more cumbersome for you. There's a book, I believe it's one of these beautiful CDs over here by Givaldo. Either, I don't think it's Living and Living. It might be I think it's Spiritual and Mental Health CD. This came out quite a while ago, over a decade or two ago. That was produced by, because of a seminar that Givaldo Franco had did, came, and then the SSB, right, Daniel? Produced the CD. It's in English. With the voiceover of, obviously, someone who's American. But what's good in this, I really like one of the tracks, because Joanna says, sometimes the problems that we have, here's some really good insight. The problems that sometimes that we have, the reason we have it still is because of fixation. We're so fixated. We're so hung up on, stuck on. And sometimes we get so, it becomes even a part of our personality, part of our identity, to always be the victim of this or that experience. Again, Spiritism never invalidates how we feel or our experiences, but simply reminds us that we have a choice to look at things differently. Oops. Each person ascends by means of self-abnegation, hard work, discipline, doing things we don't want to do, but knowing that we need to do them. So she reminds us, hold your moments of joy in your memory, no matter how insignificant they may be. Their succession will give you an enormous store of stimulating emotions for the good. Forget your failures after you consider the useful results you can draw from them. So we can learn from the things that we may deem negative in our lives, experiences we endure. We can learn from them. So take from it what we can learn, leave the rest behind, and move on. I'm going to share a personal anecdote purely for the fact that I think it illustrates some of this and how many blessings and how we can look at negativity in our lives and still see the blessing out of it. When I was 19, getting a divorce and having a little baby, and I moved back home with my parents, and I remember being distraught at 19 and being forced to grow up very fast because of my own poor decisions, for lack of a better way to put it. And I remember turning to my mother in this desperation and saying to her, what do I do now? Or rather, I looked at my parents and said this, what do I do? I'm utterly lost. I have no North Star. I don't know where to begin, where to pick up. What do I do? I've made such a mess of things. And my mother, God bless her, said the most simplest, yet the most amazing thing to me that I will never forget. And I still hold this memory very dear to me. And she just looked at me and she said, well, move on. At first, my reaction was, woman, what are you talking about? Move on. I just went through a traumatic experience. She's like, move on. What can you do? What's done is done. Move on. Make a new life. Make a new life. Make new and better memories. set goals, and move on. Just like that. Like she was saying, go brush your teeth. Like it was that simple, but it is. It is, and it's also very hard. And of course, anyone that's gone through anything in their life can attest life can be hard. When we make bad choices, the consequences can be hard. But we move on. What can you do? We could stay in that bottomless pit of depression. Absolutely, we can. In that sadness. We can. And sometimes we do. But the point is here, Joanna says, forget your failures after you consider the useful results you can draw from them. And hold your moments of joy in your memory. So it was in that time that I began to discover beautiful moments. I began to discover how absolutely amazing I felt waking up every morning with this little baby who was so joyous. And I remember, and this is a decade when now she's 22, about to turn 23. I remember her asking me, Mom, how did you feel? Like, I can't imagine being 19 and having a baby. And I said, looking back, what I remember most is waking up every morning feeling like it was Christmas for me, seeing her face. I remember that so vividly. It was through my entire soul because she was like this bright light for me. And it still is. But seeing her face every morning, just joy, pure, unadulterated, unbiased joy. So those small and what seem like insignificant things, that's what we should focus on. That's what we should hone in on. When we see the love from our animals, our cats, as Jeanette was talking about, being with her plants, those moments that seem insignificant, but hold them close. Hold them close. When something good and positive happens to you, comment on it without fanfare. Relive it and let yourself be gripped by its uplifting significance. Dwell on the good, Joanna says. Dwell on the good. When you are visited by bitterness, disillusionment, pain, or disappointment, seek to overcome it and carry on in search of new relationships. Avoid harboring resentment and unhappy details. Do not persist in making disagreeable comments. They invariably ooze unhappiness. Don't rehearse unhappiness. Don't rehearse unhappiness in your mind. Out of unhealthy habit, people fixate on unhealthy occurrences and forget about healthy memories. Consequently, they lose their best memories and accumulate perturbing ones, which occupy their mental and emotional space, blocking the broad areas of development of the conscience. Episodes of conscientiousness, whether minor or major, form the character that is the main line of conduct for life. So the ways in which we react to our lives, these habits we are forming, these are building the character of what we will have. Conscientiousness can discover the most insignificant values and turn them into positive stimuli for other achievements. So when we are discovering who we are, and we might, and very well, may encounter parts of ourselves that aren't positive, but we can look at them and turn them into positive by saying parts of ourselves that aren't. We can look at those parts of ourselves that we are discovering and say, I don't want to be like that anymore. I want to be better, or I want to do this better. The decision and effort to reach new evolutionary goals develop people's moral character. without which the most appropriately prepared plans for triumph fail. So setting the goals for ourselves in our lives. We're in November, today's November 16th. December's coming soon, then New Year's. What do we do on New Year's? We set our New Year's resolution. But let us try to do that monthly, if not more frequently. The healthy, disciplined, and responsible character defines individuals of the good, true prototypes that do not stop or give up when obstacles arise, threatening to make their progress difficult. You must carry on with your plans for moral and spiritual development, as recorded by your conscience. Do not surrender to indolence or rely on evasive or irrelevant reasons. Once you have identified your duty, rush in and fulfill it. And lastly, Joanna reminds us of the following. In the Spirit's book, it's not question 919. I actually forgot to change it. My apologies. I'll fix that. And if those who want to know, I'll fix it later. Is the necessity of labor a law of nature? And this comes in part 3 of the Spirit's book, The Divine Natural Laws, under the law of labor. Is the necessity of labor a law of nature? Labor is a law of nature, and as such is a necessity per se, because civilization both increases people's needs and their enjoyments. It obliges them to work more. So, takeaways from today. 1, work, whether it's physical work, it's emotional or psychological work, we must work. We must labor. It is a part of our evolutionary journey. So let's not be afraid of the internal work that we can do in ourselves, as well as external, as we all live in a society. But building good character, this is what we want to focus on. Focusing on the positive in our lives, the things that happen to us, things and experiences. And even when we experience things that have a negative reaction within us, let us still try to take away what we can learn from it about ourselves and move on. Help that be a catalyst for us to change and be better. But we found this quote online. We thought it was so great, for lack of a better way to put it. And I don't know who said this. There was no author. So it says like this: it might take you 30 days to create a habit, but that habit could change your life for the next 30 years. It might take you 1 hour to complete a workout, but it will keep you in a good mood for the next 12 hours. It might take you 30 minutes to complete a morning routine, but it will build momentum for the rest of the day. It might take you 5 hours to read a book, but you'll keep the knowledge forever. It might take you 3 months to learn a new skill, but that skill could make you millions. Long-term thinking really is the key. So instead of thinking just about today, but thinking how all that I'm investing in myself today will have eternal benefits for myself, but also those around us. And the famous philosopher, Eastern philosopher, I can never say his name, Lao Tzu. And there's a great audiobook. Actually, interestingly enough, my primary doctor is Asian, and he actually, one of his prescriptions to me was to download the audiobook by Lao Tzu. And I forget what it is, but I'll tell you all what it is later. But anyway, so there's this really, I don't know if it's well known or not, but it's a really good quote from Lao Tzu. Lao Tzu. I'm trying to find his book as I'm talking, but I can't find it. It's okay. He says, watch your thoughts. they become words. Watch your words, they become actions. Watch your actions, they become a habit. Watch your habits, they become a character. Watch your character, it becomes your destiny. So, with that, friends, we end this part of our discussion. Hopefully, our takeaway is we want to work towards having good habits to build our character even better than what it already is. And just think of, in the moment, things might seem hard, but in the long run, it's beneficial. So, with that, thank you so much, all of you, both on the web, here in person, for listening to this message from Joanna. And if you have any questions or comments, we can take that now. Go ahead, Daniel. Or anyone here. Sorry.
Thank you, Kirsten. We have a couple of questions here online, but wanted to open here if someone has any comment or question. Junior?
Yeah, thank you for this lovely chapter, one more lovely chapter from this most enjoyable and wise book that she presented us. When you said about the pray, I remember my grandmother, because she never studied, like literally going to school. Later on in her life, she learned how to read and write. And she would say, when somebody had a problem, she would say, tell me, what is the problem? And I said, the problem is this. She very common, she would say, I'm going to pray for the person then to have clarity of mind. Because if you don't know where you're going, how are you going to solve this problem? She doesn't have a clear mind. He doesn't have a clear mind, she would say. And she could not even pronounce the words properly in Portuguese, because all she did until she was 15 was German. But that German after war, before war. So it was quite difficult for her to communicate with people in Brazil. And then, so when people were like desperate, I go to Aunt Emma for some conversation, and she would say, life is very difficult. If you accomplish that from when you are a child, and you know how to pray, and you have clarity, and you have to move on. That was like, as I think your mother was inspired by my grandmother, because she would say, when you have a bad experience, don't sit there and talk over and over and over about that. Move on, because what is in the past is in the past. You cannot change that. But it was tough, of course. She was very serious. She wouldn't be a person that she would be talking to everybody. But when you said about this, so sometimes I said, now I need clarity here, because sometimes you don't notice what you are being trapped in, and sometimes you trapped yourself in that. Nobody, and we blame other people. This is the worst, because, and then you say, oh my God, like my mother always says, like, oh my God, that was my mistake, because I didn't see this. I was so afraid, and I believed in this false idea that I don't know who gave me, and I thought I couldn't make different. And I said, I think this is what we all do as humanity. We go on this direction because we think, we believe that this is the way traditionally you have to do and behave. And then later on down the road, you say, oh my God, how stupid this, why am I going to do this? So nowadays, my mother says, what really is necessary, and it's really important, is to be happy, not to, who cares about this and this and this? This is wrong. This is a waste of time. Now she's 88. But I think, what it all that takes, I think, to everybody is like, be humble, think about you did, but then don't dwell in that, but move on. So your mom is a very wise lady, because you never know why you go through some dramatic situations in your life. maybe you are rescuing something, or maybe you are helping somebody rescue something in their lives. And when you talk about the kidnapping lady, the one that was kidnapped, I remember in Reader's Digest a situation like the lady was shot in her head and she could not see anymore. She became blind. And then everybody said, "Oh my God, poor thing, poor thing, poor thing." And she said, "Who is a poor thing here?" Then they said, "But you got shot in the mind," the reporter said to her. She said, "Well, that happened way back in time. Somebody took my power of physical vision. However, I don't think about that anymore. I forgive and I forget that. And he stole something for me that day, but I acquire with my blindness something else." And I
It's
think
beautiful.
that is something, because how can you forget that some individual, in the middle of the night, she was assaulted. Not
Yeah.
only he did other things to her, but he shot her in the mind, and he took her belongings, and she was there on the floor. It was here in the
Yeah.
United States that happened, that in a bad neighborhood or
Yeah.
whatever. But
Yeah.
and a person to have that kind of conscience, that kind of lucidity,
Awareness. Yeah,
awareness, yeah.
that's that conscientiousness where you come, and each one of us can come to that level of awareness. It's a beautiful story, Joni. Thank you for that. Yeah. I mean, each one of us, it's an opportunity, right? Every time something bad, challenging happens to us, it's an opportunity where we can learn something from it, or we also can, 30 years ago, or we can still be a prisoner of what happened to us 30 years ago. But instead, she allowed it to add to her life. Thank you, Joni. That was really good.
Kirsten, because of time, very quickly, there is 3 questions. Just give your feedback on these 3
Sure.
questions. I'm gonna post here. Alba
Do you want me
Morales
to
ask.
display it here?
You can do over
Okay.
there. Just click the yes, and just put the whole. Yeah, you can see over there. She asked, talking about the visuals, I'm wondering if there is something like a quote visual checklist that can help us to determine what visual we already achieved and what we need to develop.
Yeah, there is a virtues checklist. And I'm not trying to be funny here, but the virtues checklist, I would say, is when you go to sleep at night, or maybe in the morning, or sometimes during the day, you sit and ask yourself, where am I on this spectrum? What am I doing good? But also, what areas can I do a little bit better or a lot better on? Benjamin Franklin famously had his virtue checklist and would take note of which virtues he was working on, which ones he was, not doing so well on. And nowadays, with the age of the internet and Pinterest, is our best friend, because Pinterest, all you need to do is a quick search, virtue checklist, and you can find an already existing checklist similar to what Benjamin Franklin had, or you even can edit to fit your own style. But it's a series, and I think, and it's such a great question, Alba, because it's so personal, and I think that we could, generalize it, but I think it's so personal to each one of us, because only we know in the depths of our heart and souls, what we need to work on and where we're at. As St. Augustine famously, I believe it was St. Augustine, who had said, at night you have that conversation with yourself. How did I do today? Because sometimes if we're trying to do an examination of our whole life, sometimes some people might feel like that's too overwhelming. So just starting with the day, at the end of your day, how did I do today? How did I do with my interactions with my coworkers, with members of my family, with my dog? Did I want to kick it, but I didn't? My level of patience with the clerk at the at the supermarket. So we can ask ourselves a series of questions, because it's such a unique thing to each person, because I might be suffering from lack of patience in one area, but someone might be having challenges with lack of patience in a different way, in a different perspective. So that would be my response. I hope that was helpful, Alba. That was a great question. I think the point is to keep asking the question and to stay curious about ourselves.
And there is another one, preliminary. Consciousness is awareness of our conscience.
Okay.
Is conscience awareness of your conscience? Is a question. The quiet, still voice that knows.
Conscientiousness is awareness of our conscience, the still quiet voice that knows. Conscientiousness is being aware of not just ourselves, because that's just self-awareness. And that will be maybe that quiet knowing in ourself. Conscientiousness is when we are conscious of not just ourselves, but the world at large, the greater good, that God oversees all things, and that we have that awareness beyond ourselves, beyond what we are circumscribed to in my little world. So it'll be a little bit more beyond that. I could be wrong in some ways, but I think more or less that's what it is.
And Paulo Schmidt asks, thanks for the wonderful series that emphasize self-reflection. Remember Matthew Fox, change original sin to original blessings. Hence, we
Innately our joy.
And
Yeah, that's
tasked
beautiful.
with sharing that every day.
I love
Just
that.
a
I didn't
comment.
I didn't remember that he had said that. I'm assuming she's talking about Matthew Fox or Michael J. Fox. Maybe it's Matthew Fox. I'll have to look him up. But I love this idea of changing original sin, and that's a reference to when Eve ate the apple, and she was the cause of the original sin. And so all of humanity, all of our troubles stem from that. That is the original sin in some religious arenas. So, but changing that as the original blessing, I love that, because it's all about perspective. It truly is. Thank you, everyone else, for watching. Thank you, Ida Sama, for your kind words, and everyone else that has been watching. We encourage you, if you haven't already, to watch the other episodes. For those of you who are watching online, to watch the other videos on this book series or other series that are on our YouTube channel, that are what we think is our blessings and can be uplifting as well. So with that, with no other comments, questions, we can turn to our prayer for this moment, and switching gears to our moment of passes. And we will transition. Thank you. Once again, just being in this moment of quiet gratitude in our hearts, remembering Jesus, remembering the love that he had for every person who crossed his path, especially to those who were deemed by society as unworthy, as outcasts, as sinful. People in society who wanted nothing, no one wanted anything to do with them, whether because of their lack of morals or physical ailments. But when Jesus looked at them as he looks at us now, as children of God, let us allow him to enter our minds and hearts. Let us begin to see ourselves as God, as Jesus sees us. full of potential, full of opportunity, full of love and ability to do better, to achieve heights we've never achieved before, and to believe in the possibility of our joy, and to be joyful every moment of life, despite what comes our way. Dear God, help us to form these new habits, these new ways of viewing things and perspectives, these new ways of experiencing life. May we have the courage and the strength to be open, to think of new ideas. We pray, dear God, that each one of us in both realms of life can open up to this possibility, the possibility of us being a better version of ourselves, the best version of ourselves, to believe we are destined for happiness and that we deserve it. Let us breathe in these healing vibrations, these uplifting thoughts and ideas. Let's continue to think more about this.